His arrival in arms on French territory was not the result of conspiracy. There were no plotters there where everyone else was plotting. The king, because of his loss of confidence, his ministers, because of their incompetence, the exiles, because of their conceit, and the combination of ignorance and presumption that was to be their downfall, and with them that of the country, those were the conspirators. If, as he wanted, the emperor had been able to wait for a lasting peace and ensure the promulgation of the Constitution, he would have eliminated the most important source of division brought about by our first misfortunes and taken away from the enemy powerful means of creating trouble and internal dissension. Deeply moved by love and gratitude towards his country, and by the heady welcome he had received, he wanted to please France. He tried to satisfy public opinion, to flatter the public spirit, and those around him who attempted to be its interpreters erred and misled the emperor. It was believed during the 100 Days that Napoleon did not show the force of willpower that had led him to such great success. As I have said, people did not sufficiently take into account his desire to please the people. The emperor had dictatorship in hand. He should have kept it. His shrewdness was almost never at fault. He often pointed out what he had to do, and events proved him right. But in this case, he had to yield to objections coming from his advisors, who were most attached not only to his person, but to the welfare of France, its independence, honor, and the glory of the state. The emperor said in St. Helena that the steel of several generals had lost its temper in the events of 1814. They had lost something of the confidence, audacity, and resolve that had earned them so much glory. What he said about the generals was true of everyone. The Allied declaration of March 13th had caused the loss of much assurance among members of the ministry and the Council of State. That declaration became generally known in Paris a few days after the emperor's arrival. It was to weaken its influence that the Council of State, in its March 29th speech, retracted commitments the emperor had made in his proclamations to the nation and to the army to produce a constitution, and inserted this paragraph: to better establish the rights and obligations of the people and the monarch, the national institutions must be reviewed by a major assembly of representatives, already announced by the emperor. This promise warded off the dangers of the March 13th declaration and directed the mind of the public away from it, but it lent strength to the arguments of those who wanted any kind of constitution in spite of the times and events. At Malmaison, which reminded the emperor of his early years of glory and happiness, he was surrounded with care and love by Queen Hortense, and the devotion of the generals and other officers who offered to accompany him in his misfortune. Count Bertrand, the Duke of Rovigo, Savary, Generals Lallemande, Montillon, and Gourgaud shared the duties of ADC. Majors de Rizigny and Planat, joined by Captains Mercier and Schultz, those of military aid. The last had accompanied the emperor to Elba. He and several others, on the eve of the departure for Malmaison, solicited the honor of the following the emperor there. Baron de Monterrand served as equerry there, Count de las Casas as chamberlain and his son, and Monsieur de la Pagerie as pages. The food service was quite extensive, and the household service the same as in Paris. During the few days spent at Malmaison, the emperor received visits from his friends, who traveled out at all hours of the day to bring him news. He questioned them anxiously. Among those who came were Count de la Valette, the Duke of Bassano-Muret, Generals Flahault, Libaudet, and Caprelli, Monsieur Poggi, and the emperor's brothers, Prince Joseph, Lucien, and Jerome. The ladies who had remained deeply attached to him did not fail him either. Queen Hortense's drawing room was filled in the evening with Countess Bertrand, Montillon, and Caprelli. The Duchess of Rovigo, Savary, Bassano-Muret, Countess Regnon de Saint-Jean d'Angely, Walewska, and others whose name escaped me, came to Malmaison and shared in the sorrow. Madame Palepra also came to bring consolations to the heart that were much appreciated by the emperor. On the rock of St. Helena, her memories served sometimes to chase away the boredom of captivity, when he remembered her soul and her beauty. Before leaving Paris, I had packed a trunk of things now useless to the emperor, made up of imperial clothes from the Champ de Mai, His Majesty's lace, weapons, an antique hilt, and a small medal collection. In accordance with the emperor's orders, I had sent it all to the Count de Turenne, Grand Master of the Wardrobe, who remained its custodian. I had brought with me the large medal collection. The emperor told me to give it to Count de la Valette, who gave me in exchange 30,000 francs in gold, which were deposited with Monsieur Lafitte. Before leaving Paris, the emperor had opened an account with this banker with a credit of 4 or 5 million through Monsieur Perregaux, one of his chamberlains. This having been accepted, such a sum was deposited that same day, the emperor's entire fortune. On this occasion, His Majesty saw Monsieur Lafitte, and in St. Helena said that he had found in him not only a financier, but a man with a very good grasp of important political questions. The emperor was waiting rather impatiently for the arrival of the passports he had requested, as well as the order making 2 frigates available to him to go to America. When on June 25th, General Becker came to Malmaison to take command of the Imperial Guard and to see both his protection and the respect owed him, Queen Hortense thought that they were going to arrest the emperor. She was frightened and was about to throw herself between His Majesty and the man charged with this mission, when she was told the enemy was approaching Paris. The general was only sent to see the emperor's personal safety. As soon as he arrived, General Becker asked to be shown in to the emperor and handed him a letter from the Minister of War. Prince of Equimaux Davout worded it in this fashion. Paris, June 25th, 1815, 4 p.m. General, please be advised that the government commission has named you to command the guard of the Emperor Napoleon at Malmaison. The honor of France requires that his safety and the respect owed him be assured. The interest of the nation demands that malicious people be prevented from using his name to foment trouble. General, your acknowledged character is the government's and France's guarantee that you shall fulfill both tasks. You are invited to proceed immediately to Malmaison, take command of the guard, and take all dispositions required to accomplish these goals. Sincerely, etc., Minister of War, Prince of Equimaux Davout. This measure, dictated by the Duke of Otranto, Fouché, and agreed to by the Minister of War, was nothing but a disguised way of monitoring the emperor's actions. This had become the more necessary, as both the statesmen had already been in contact with Baron de Vitrolles, the king's agent, regarding the return of Louis XVIII. The emperor did not fail to point this out to General Becker, who behaved most honorably in these circumstances. On my return from St. Helena, I had the honor of seeing the general frequently, and this is what he told me about the situation. When I accepted this mission, it was only in order to serve the emperor and protect him. I did not then suspect what was revealed to me a few days later, that the Duke of Otranto, Fouché, and the Prince of Equimaux, Davout, were negotiating with royalist agents. The emperor was hurt by the manner in which I had been sent to him. He would have liked for the government to inform him officially of an act he considered a formality and not a measure of surveillance to which it was useless to subject him. The idea that the emperor could believe that I could lend myself to any role other than that of a good soldier who had come to look after his safety appalled me. And I told him that if my presence at Malmaison could awaken such a suspicion, I would immediately resign the mission I had been entrusted with. The emperor saw how hurt I was and said to me, "Set your mind at ease, General. Had I been given the choice of an officer, I would have designated you by preference, as I have long been aware of your loyalty." He took me out into the garden, and we talked about Paris. The general reminded me, on board the Salle, that I had given him one of the emperor's shirts, which he cherished. The emperor was worried to see the enemy army moving closer to Paris without any resistance being offered or other measures taken to defend the city. He spoke of this with his entourage. Light troops could reach Malmaison. It was said that the enemy army was near Paris. What he had predicted was coming true. The French commissioners complained about the bad faith shown by the Allies during negotiations. The anxiety of the government was increasing, and the emperor's delay in leaving Malmaison made them fear that a spontaneous decision might lead the emperor to take command of the army and destroy the entire scaffolding of treason that was handing Paris over to the enemy. It was only on the 27th that the Grand Marshal, who was in Paris to secure 2 frigates from the government commissioned to take the emperor to the United States, wrote to His Majesty that the Minister of the Navy was making available to him 2 frigates in the Rochefort harbor, and that all orders relative to relay posts along the way had been given. The frigates were not to arrive the Rochefort roadstead before the safe conducts had arrived. The Duke of Otranto, Fouché, gave verbal authorization to Capuchin to take from the Tuileries, where orders had been given not to let anything more be taken, a complete table service of 12 settings, the porcelain known as headquarters, 6 sets of table linen for 12 in damask cloth, 6 sets of kitchen linen, 12 pairs of high quality sheets, 12 pairs of ordinary sheets, 6 dozen towels, 2 travel coaches, 3 saddles and bridles for general officers, 3 saddles and bridles for grooms, 400 books to be taken from the Rambouillet library, various maps, and 100,000 francs for travel expenses. This was what the government was granted to the man who had governed France with so much glory and given considerable fortunes to those who surrounded him. The very man who was allowing these modest belongings to be taken had received from him an income of 200,000 pounds. In spite of the provisional government's urging the emperor, both by letter and by oral communications, to leave Malmaison, the emperor was paying no heed. General Becker was ordered to appear in Paris in front of the commission, who ordered him to depart incognito that same evening with the emperor for Rochefort. At the same time, he received a passport authorizing the general to go to that city with his secretary and servant. The secretary was to be the emperor. This ridiculous order was no more heeded than the preceding ones. It led the emperor to have General Becker tell the Provisional Government Commission that he gave up the idea of going to Rochefort. As communications were not free, he did not think his personal safety had enough guarantees. Furthermore, once at that destination, he had to consider himself a prisoner. Since his departure from the island of Aix depended on passports to go to America that would no doubt be refused, therefore the emperor was determined to await a decision regarding him at Malmaison. He would wait until the Duke of Wellington issued a ruling on his fate, and the government was free to announce this. He was therefore remaining at Malmaison, certain that nothing unworthy of the nation and its government would be attempted against him. Since June 25th, frequent messages had passed between the government and General Becker at Malmaison. The emperor's friends came in great numbers, but on the 28th, the closing of the barriers and the erection of a barricade at Neuilly Bridge presented some difficulties in reaching him. However, on the same day, I again saw my brother-in-law and sister who told me of the agitation in Paris. People did not understand the emperor's calm at the approach of the enemy. That afternoon, Madame Plepra sent a message to me through her servant that she was waiting for me on the street in Roya, and I went there at once. She assured me that she knew without a doubt that the Duke of Otranto, Fouché, was currently negotiating with Monsieur de Vitrolles, Louis XVIII's agent, and that the Prince of Eckmühl, Davout, while concentrating his forces around Paris, was paralyzing their action. She told me to warn the emperor of this. The first of those 2 ministers was the man who would hand over the emperor if there was a profit in it for him. While I was with that lady, part of the guard that was in Roya fell out with their weapons. Worried about what this could mean, I left her to return to Malmaison, where I learned that the approach of the enemy, General Becker, had received orders to destroy the bridges at Chateau and Bezons, and to maintain a military guard on those roads. He was firmly resolved to defend the emperor with the few hundred men he had under him, joined by the generals and military aides who were with him. Saint-Denis had been sent to Versailles by the emperor to fetch some shotguns, saddle pistols, and a box containing 2 pairs of fine pistols. He had found the road free, but there was concern that the emperor was remaining so quietly at Malmaison, where patrols could find him without warning. Messieurs de Bassano, Marais, and Lavalette, and the Duke of Rovigo, Savary, and General Bertrand were with him. That evening, when the emperor retired to his quarters, I told him what I had learned of the mood in Paris and the will to defend itself should His Majesty appear, but that in his absence there would be total inertia and the Bourbons would be accepted. Madame de Plepra, who I had seen in Roya with, asked me to tell him that the Duke of Otranto Fouché was negotiating with Monsieur de Vitrolles, and the commissioners sent to the enemy camp were not listened to. The emperor replied, "All that I have told them is coming true. Lafayette is a simpleton, and those people who do not know the French spirit are ruining the country." During the night of the 28th and 29th, Duke de Crace and Count Boulet de la Meurthe came to Malmaison. The emperor had been in bed for several hours when I quietly entered his room to tell him these gentlemen had arrived. When they were shown in, they told the emperor that the enemy army around Paris gave rise to fears for his personal safety. The government had decided to consider as null and void the paragraph in the ordinance that, in putting the frigates at his disposal, forbade them to sail without safe conduct. The interests of the state, as well as his own, demanded imperatively that he leave at once. Passports had been brought for all those who proposed to share the emperor's exile. His Majesty talked to them for a moment of the evils he saw descending on the motherland, then dismissed them both. On receiving his farewells, they left in a state that bore witness to the deep sorrow in their hearts. That day, Monsieur Corvisart had come to Malmaison with one of his pupils, a young practitioner he brought to present to the emperor. Monsieur Ferraud de Beauregard, his doctor in Elba, intended to rejoin the emperor later, but having been elected deputy in his department and having to pursue his legal obligation, could not for the moment relinquish the mandate he had received from his fellow citizens. This young man, Monsieur Mengot, had been called on to replace him. After he was introduced, the emperor told him to take his orders from the Grand Marshal and remained walking in the garden with Monsieur Corvisart for a full half hour. On leaving him, the emperor went back to his rooms and summoned me, as he usually did. He handed me a small vial about 15 lines long by 4 or 5 wide. It contained a red liquid and urged me to let no one see it, adding, "See to it that I have it on me, either by attaching it to my jacket or some other part of my clothing, so I can always reach it easily." At that same moment, word came that the Duke of Bassano, Marais, or Count de Lavalette was in the drawing room. I remained alone with the vial, which doubtlessly contained instant death. My thoughts were very sad until that evening, when I again saw the emperor when he retired. After telling him what Madame Palapra had said, I was about to leave when he asked me what I had done with the vial he had given me. I showed him the end of his left suspender strap, which he could easily reach with his right hand, and under that strap I showed him a small leather pouch containing the vial, which could easily slide in or out, kept in place by an eyelet with a small cord through it. He examined it all, took the vial out and put it back in, and looked at me and said, "That's fine." And as he noted how distressed I was, he pressed my hand on my cheek and told me to get everything ready for his departure, which would probably take place the next day. Allowing for a sudden departure, I made an agreement with Monsieur Colin, comptroller of the Emperor's household, a man both honest and devoted to the Emperor. He would see that the 2 carriages that were to transport the silver and the so-called headquarters porcelain were always ready to be hitched to the post horses, and got underway. He handed me an inventory of their contents. He had not stopped at the 12-piece silver set, as the Duke of Otranto Fouché had generously done with his master. He added all of the silver the Emperor's set at the Élysée to that brought from the Tuileries. This explains how, after selling a great deal of it in St. Helena, much still remained after His Majesty's death. On the morning of his departure, the Emperor talked to me and told me to assure those servants who were coming with him that their existence was taken care of. I took the liberty of answering him that they all considered themselves fortunate to be able to offer their devotion. An allowance was given each of them by the Grand Marshal for travel expenses. I learned that Ferdinand, the cook in Elba, was not going with the Emperor, and that King Joseph had promptly placed his own at his disposal. He placed around his body the diamond necklace which Queen Hortense had begged him to accept, as it might be of use to him in this moment of great misfortune. Having determined which roads the carriages would follow to Rochefort, the Emperor had 1,800 francs issued to General Montholon and 1,500 to General Gourgaud for relay post expenses between Paris and that city. A few sums of 10,000 francs were distributed to people he could not take with him, and who were in serious financial straits. Monsieur Poggi and others. Generals Chartrand and Piret came to ask for the means to escape the persecution they were threatened with. There was exasperation in their voices. The Emperor was warned of this. He noticed it and said it was only fair that people who had sacrificed themselves for him should come to him. He had 10,000 francs given to each of them to attend their immediate needs, and regretted that he could not do as much for all who were going to suffer because of him. Since the return from Waterloo, the people surrounding the Emperor had been advising him to go to England. The Emperor, who said his political existence was at an end, preferred the United States, and it was for that destination he was about to set off. In the morning, cries of "Vive l'Empereur! Down with the Bourbons! Down with the traitors!" was heard along the road. It was a division returning from the Vendée, who, knowing the Emperor was still at Malmaison, had stopped in front of the park and refused to take another step without seeing the Emperor or taking him with them. This cry that reached us, "Vive l'Empereur," so often the certain sign of victory, rekindled in the souls of the warriors surrounding the Emperor their love of combat. The Emperor, too, allowed his great heart to be seized with enthusiasm, because after talking to the general commanding that division, he summoned General Becker and told him he was delaying his departure by a few hours, enough time to submit to the government his proposal to take command of the army in the name of Napoleon II, and outlined for them a plan of operation that gave every chance of success in driving the enemy beyond the border within a few days. General Becker gave proof of his devotion by agreeing to undertake a mission which could bring him criticism from the government. But he saw a chance of salvation for the country in the plans proposed by the emperor, and he departed. He had great difficulty reaching the commission because of obstacles on the way. The Duke of Bassano Moret, who had come to work with the emperor, left him shortly after the general's departure to work for the emperor's return, should his offer be accepted. Such was not the case. The proposal was received with dread. They had thought the emperor far from Paris, and the offer he was making would completely undo the negotiations so painfully worked out with the royalist agents to make them acceptable to the president of the council and also to the members of the commission who now would only be guided by him. First, a reply was made by the Duke of Otranto, Fouché, that his offer was unacceptable. Then they criticized the general in bitter terms for having taken on his mission when he ought to be on the road to Rochefort. It was urgent for him to leave at once, as the emperor was no longer safe in the vicinity of Paris. As general requested that he carry a government decision on the result of his mission, the Duke of Otranto immediately wrote the following note to the Duke of Bassano Moret, whom he supposed to still be at Malmaison. As the provisional government cannot accept the proposal that General Becker has just made on behalf of His Majesty for reasons that you yourself will appreciate, I pray you to use the influence you have always had on him to advise him to leave without delay, as the Prussians are marching on Versailles. etc. Signed, Duke of Otranto.